All right. This is going to be a big video. So let's see how I do and let's see how you follow along. You might have to watch this one a couple times, but maybe not. Let's see. Essentially, what we're going to do now that you can drop in digital audio files and hear them back when you hit play, we want to start having some fun in our exploration of Reaper and actually learning what's going on and what all this is in front of us. To get started, let's create a few additional tracks within Reaper. To do this, there's a number of ways. First off, I'm going to make this a little smaller so we can see it. Also, did you notice that when I put my mouse here at the bottom, I also can increase height that way? We can double click over in the left-hand section here of the arrangement view, and this will create a track. We'll make this one smaller too. Or, of course, we have the default option of taking a sound and just dropping it and creating a track. I could also then, of course, add a track to this track I've already created. So, oh, couldn't do it. Let's see here. Let's add a different sound then. Not a problem. We'll add the Art of War that we got earlier. Okay. And then, of course, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to listen to these and name our tracks. Again, to double click in these. So this is Art of War. And then this one is a river. So we'll just label that appropriately. And now we have our three tracks and have labeled them. And we can listen to them. I'm going to first bring down my master gain, and we'll talk about that later. If I put my playhead in here to play, great. We can play everything back. We can hear it, and we're off to the races. How exciting. Let me get myself evened out here. So, in the arrangement view for each track, the first thing that I want you to be aware of is the track control panel, or the TPC. And the track control panel is this section to the left of the track that contains some information. So in this case, it's got the name of the track, as well as a number of ways of messing or altering playback details of the track that we're going to get to in a second. But this is the TPC section. Within the TPC, we'll get a different color here. There is the gain level, which is this knob right here. There is an amplitude meter, which I believe is right here, although we're going to change that view in a moment so we can see it better. There's the pan position. We'll talk about this more in a little bit. And then there is a mute button and a solo button. And we'll talk about what all of these do. Just so you know, this information is mirrored in the mixer window down below. Again, our mixer window is this section below here. Notice that the name of the track, Trees, Birds, and Wind, is the same as right here, Trees, Birds, and Wind. Let me get a new screen here. Also, just so you know, the gain level is going to be, mirrored right here with this fader. And if I move this fader down here, notice that this knob right here moves around and changes. Likewise, if I move the fader for Art of War, the fader right here changes. And if I move the fader knob or the gain knob for Art of War in the TPC, it moves in the mixer as well. Same thing with the pan potentiometer. This will move left and right, and this is mirrored in our mixer right here is our pan. Our mute button is going to do the same thing. Let's get a new color so that's easier to see. And our solo button, same thing. Going to be mirrored. So if I press solo, notice we get the solo up here. If I press mute, notice we get mute down here. Okay, let's clear all of that out. In audio, the gain amount is gain is the amount of change applied to boost or attenuate an audio signal's amplitude. You will typically have referred to this as volume. And I believe actually in Reaper, they label this as volume as well. Yeah, see if I hold my mouse over the control, the volume help thing eventually pops up. We're going to call it gain though. Boosting gain means that we're multiplying by some factor and actually raising the sound coming out of a track. So let me mute these other two tracks and we'll do our trees. Well, we'll do our river. It's a nice steady state. So let's center this up here. And if I play back here, if I attenuate the gain and essentially go to the left here, we notice that the volume goes down and it gets quieter. And if I go to the right and go up or boost the gain, it gets louder. In the mixer, as I mentioned already, it looks like a physical fader as you might have on a physical mixing board. And of course, there is this kind of skeuomorphism design concept where we're trying to match what the real world analogs of these things are. It's important to note that the gain adjustment doesn't actually affect the loudness, isn't specifying the loudness of the track, but rather is specifying how much to boost or attenuate the track by. This is an important distinction. We are not able to say play it at this volume, but instead we're saying here the track has been recorded at this volume, let's make it louder or let's make it softer. The other thing I want you to notice is that by default, when we start out, we have this 0.00 value here. That essentially is 0 decibels, meaning we're not boosting or attenuating the signal of that track at all. If I push the gain fader up, we get 12 decibels, meaning we are boosting the track's output by 12 decibels. And if we pull the master fader down a little bit further here and play, we're not quite getting any. Oh, see, it did. It turned. It got red, which means that it. Come on, look at the screen. Which means that it peaked. Essentially, it's too loud. If you ever see red like that in our meters right here, it means it's too loud. Same thing up here, too loud. Likewise, if I bring the fader down, notice we start to get negative values. So now I'm applying negative 13.9 decibels of gain to the track. And if I click in this red, it'll reset here so we don't see that anymore. And if I keep coming down, eventually we get to negative infinity. Essentially, we are multiplying the track by 0 and no sound is coming out at all. As soon as I start to pull the fader up, we start to get some more sound. If I want to just go back to 0 decibels, I can double click on the fader and it goes right back to 0 decibels, thereby not applying any boost or attenuation of the gain itself. And the last thing I want you to know, I've got a note here. If you increase the gain of track so much that it causes the resulting audio to be greater than 0 decibels full scale, so 0 dBFS, as I mentioned, that means that it's actually gone above the max amplitude of a digital signal. We're going to get digital clipping. That's bad. We don't want it. It sounds bad. It's not an attractive sound. Don't have digital clipping. It's something that it's one of the few things, there's many things, but I will lower your grade if I notice clipping going on in any of your tracks. So whenever you see this, know that you need to stop, back up, and address your track in some way so that we're not getting that clipping. And again, to reset that, just click right in there, and then we're going to do it like that. As I just mentioned also, there's the amplitude meter. And the amplitude meter shows in real time a visual representation of the track's output amplitude. Essentially, how loud is the track playing right now in the system. If we play a river, it's a fairly constant sound. Let's make it so we can hear it a little bit better. It just hovers kind of at the same level, about negative 11.1 decibels full scale. We see over here, because I'm attenuating our master output, we have a similar a number of negative 23. And again, it kind of hangs in the same area. And we also see this in our meter up here. Let me unmute the Art of War track.
Dispersive ground.
And we see a lot more dynamics in the output. The meter is essentially moving around in time in response to this track. And we can visually see these amplitude changes in the track as well. Anywhere that there is a larger peak, essentially, is going to be a louder moment in our track. We can visually see that the river is essentially fairly constant throughout, which is the reason why it was a constant look on our meter. The pan position, or rather panning, is a technique of moving a sound source around within a multi-channel sound field. Typically, panning moves a sound source around a stereo field, that is, from left to right, over 2 speakers. Headphones have 2 speakers. Most stereo systems, stereo by its name, is defined as being a 2-speaker system. And so when we're talking about localization or positioning of sound sources, we're often talking about them within the stereo field or 2-channel system. And that's what we're going to limit ourselves to the time being. Just as a side note, mono, of course, would refer to a 1-channel system. In audio, if something has been mixed in stereo and it's presented on mono, both of those tracks just get added together and put out 1 speaker, which can cause problems. So we also want to check for mono compatibility. We'll talk about that later in the semester when we get more into mixing. But know that mixing, you can mix in mono or you can mix in stereo. If you're mixing in mono, essentially, you're not touching the pan potentiometer. You're just leaving it straight up and down in the center. But let's hear. So we're gonna unmute our river again. I'm gonna turn it up a bit so we can hear more. And I can take this pan potentiometer. If I pull it all the way to the left, audio is only coming out of the left. Likewise, I can go down to the mixer and adjust the pan and move it all the way to the right. Now audio is only coming out of the right speaker. And you can hear that moving as I move that around. Again, in any parameter, usually if I double click it, it's going to go back to its default, in this case, center. The pan is defined as a percentage. So in this case, 12% left, 17% left, 100% left, 100% right, center. Also notice that in the meter, we actually saw the representation of that change. As I move to the left, we start to get more visual representation of our signal on the left channel and less on the right channel. If I move all the way to the right, then we get only sound in our right channel, and visually we can verify that there is no sound coming out of our left channel. When you solo a track, it becomes the only track that the DAW plays. So in this case, I've got all my tracks muted. Let's pull them all together so that all 3 are playing at the same time. And I'll show you what the soloing track does. We'll go back here to the beginning. I'm going to turn my screen off. The solo button is this S. Let me circle that so you can see it more clearly. This S right here. And we have one for each track. And down below in the mixer, same thing. Here's the solo button for each of our 3 tracks. I'll go back to my mouse. And let's play. Let's say I want to solo trees, birds, and wind. If I hit the solo button, it's now the only thing we hear. Likewise, if I hit the solo button for Art of War,
6, serious
we
ground.
now hear the Art of War solo.
7, difficult ground. 8,
and finally, I can solo river sound. And that's then the only thing we hear. Soloing a track allows an audio engineer or artist to search for and quickly identify problems or work on individual tracks in detail. Essentially, it allows you to quickly say, if you had let's say you had a session with hundreds of tracks and you were trying to track down a problem or wanted to work on one specific track, rather than trying to mute each of those tracks, you could solo one individual track and then work on that track. Opposite to soloing a track is muting a track. And muting a track essentially mutes the output of that track from the main output of Reaper. So if we're playing our tracks here,
1.
and I
Dispersive
press the
ground.
mute button,
2. Facile.
now we only hear the river. If I mute the river, now we hear nothing. I can unmute Art of War.
5. Ground of intersect.
I could unmute trees, birds, and wind. You may find yourself needing to mute a track when you may want to check if something sounds better with or without a certain sound. You may be building up a mix and working between multiple tracks, requiring the muting of some tracks as you work on other groups. Or it might be a reference track of some sort that you only want to hear sparingly. Muting is something you're going to use a lot, and I want you to make sure that you're aware of the ability to mute tracks. Finally, the last thing I wanted to point out in Reaper here, I'm going to unmute these things, is that you can change the way that these look. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because moving forward, you'll notice that my Reaper looks slightly different than it does in this current video right now, and potentially in some of the screenshots I've taken, because I prefer different looks. If I go to layouts here under Mixer panel, I prefer the B layout for Mixer panel. And what I want you to do before I click that is I want you to watch how this, how this section right here changes when I go to the B section, or rather to any other section. Layouts, Mixer panel. So first A, we're on the A section setting, so it doesn't change how the layout is. B, it's a little bit of a cleaner look, and that's the reason I prefer it. I can still see what my value is for the mixer, and of course I can still double click on things. And the other one is Mixer panel C, which is a minimized version. For the time being, I'm going to leave this actually on A. And likewise, for the track control panel, we can change how that looks. And this is the one that's a little bit more important to me that you know how to change. So track panel, A should be the one that we're looking at right now. So there's no change there. B, notice that this changed a little bit up. I'm actually going to make this a little bit wider too. Yeah, we'll go right here. So right now I've actually got a fader in my track control panel instead of a knob. So let's look at the difference again. Let's go back to the A. So notice my gain is a knob in the A version, and my gain is a fader in the B version. The other thing is I've got a little bit more control over some of my inputs and outputs, and that's one of the main reasons why I use this B layout in my track control panel. And C is a totally different view that I find not particularly useful to me at all. So I would encourage you to move your track panel to the B layout and just get used to looking at it that way. And again, you can, if depending on the size of your screen, you can make this wider or more narrow depending on what you are needing. I typically have it set to about there. So thank you very much. Hopefully that made sense, kind of showing the overviews of Reaper. Next, we're going to start to look at how we can actually edit audio in Reaper.